Chapter 2. Tuan has a plan. Mother looked about in the gathering darkness. She saw Condima in her hiding place behind the clay stove. "Come, we are all going to the teacher's house to see the Tuan." She took hold of Condima's hand. "I don't want to go," Condima wailed. How could she let the Tuan see her poor, spoiled eye? "Hush! Of course you must go." Mother drew her down the steep little ladder. Eager, excited people packed Teacher Dodd's house and pressed around the Tuan. He sat on the floor talking to them. He asked them about their children and their crops, smiling at this one and that one. Condima saw her own father shake hands with the Tuan. "Are your children here?" The Tuan glanced around the room. "Yes, they are all here." Father smiled with pride. He handed baby Bonnie to the Tuan so that he might lift the fine boy and see how heavy he had grown since the Tuan's last visit. Chaya stood behind her father, shyly waiting. Father turned, took her hand, and drew her forward. "This is my big girl." The Tuan put one arm around Chaya. "And where is my little lively one, Condima?" A number of people began calling, "Condima! Condima!" in loud voices. Mother thrust her forward. She felt all of her insides sinking. The Tuan handed baby Bonnie back to Father. He cupped Condima's chin in his big hand and turned her face up towards his. She saw the sharp pain in his kind gray eyes. Then, with a warm and friendly smile, he gathered Condima's trembling little body in his arms and cuddled her against his broad chest. He held her so all through the evening while he talked with the village people and while they sang and prayed. The Tuan loved her the same as always. Condima knew that now, and she felt so much better than she had felt at any time since the thorn had blinded her eye. The mothers passed the rice and the pullet patties around with the grated coconut and brown sugar. Everyone ate, even Condima. When the happy company broke up, not one person looked sad or troubled. Mother had already taken baby Bonnie home. Father took Condima from the Tuan's arms and started down the ladder. "Wait a minute." The Tuan laid his hand on Father's arm. "Wait just a minute. I want to talk with you." Father set Condima down on the ladder with Chaya, and they huddled together, waiting while Father stepped back into the room, and both girls heard the Tuan speaking to Father. "Your little Condima has had a bad accident in her right eye." Then Father told him the whole sad story. "Almost 2 months have passed since it happened," Father sighed. "But what can we do? The eye is finished. Not one can bring back the eye, even with the most powerful medicine." "What you say is true." The Tuan's deep voice was soft as he spoke again. "All you say is true, but we must save the other eye. If something is not done soon, she will lose the left eye too and be entirely blind." Then the Tuan told Father that he would take Condima down to his home in the big seaport town and find the best medicine possible to cure the fever and redness in the good eye. Father promised to think it over. Condima heard her parents talking about the Tuan's plan until late in the night. "I wonder if medicine would really do any good." Mother's voice held tears. "She's so young," Father insisted. "She has never traveled beyond our valley. She would be lonesome and sad all the time. She would make the Tuan's family worried and miserable with her crying." After a long silence, Mother spoke again. "I am afraid of the white man's medicine. People say that the white people steal the jungle children and use their hearts and their livers to make medicine. I have heard that they shoot people with a gun like a sharp thorn. People go to sleep for hours after being shot with such a gun. That's when they cut out their hearts and livers for medicine." "I don't believe any of those stories." Father's voice sounded scornful. "I think the witch doctors make up such stories so people will be afraid to listen to the missionaries." Again, Mother didn't speak for a long time. Kandima began to feel sleepy. Then, in a sharp tone, Mother said, "No, I will not let her go. I might never see my child again. What has happened. We will let it stay as it is." Then Father began to argue that it might be a good thing to try the white man's medicine. "The Tuan is good," he said. "He has little ones of his own. I'm sure he would let no harm come to Kandima. Did you see how gently he held her tonight?" "No, no, you cannot persuade me." Mother had made up her mind. Kandima listened on her mat in the corner of her parents' room, turned her face to the wall, and cried herself to sleep. It seemed but a moment later that bright morning sun shone through every crack in the leaf walls, and someone shouted at the door. Kandima ran to open the door just a little. Mukit and Elijah stood at the foot of the ladder. "My knife! My knife!" Mukit waved a shiny object around over his head. "You said the Tuan wouldn't bring it." "But he did. He did." Kandima slammed the door as hard as she could, seeing that she had opened it such a little ways. But nothing could shut out the sound of Mukit's and Elijah's laughter. Kandima went to the far side of the hut and looked out the only window. Tuan and Teacher Dodd stood by the teacher's house. Bits of their talk reached Kandima's keen ears. "We must have a school for them, Dodd. The boys should learn to work with iron and wood. The girls should learn to sew and cook and care for children. All of them should learn to read and write." Teacher Dodd nodded, and they said other things which Kandima couldn't hear. Then they both turned and walked up the ladder into the teacher's house. Teacher Dodd had been living in Duran village for 6 months already, and Kandima knew that he had planned from the beginning to open a school for the boys and girls. But Kandima knew that the village people feared any change in their way of living. They couldn't see any use in having girls go to school to learn reading and writing when they could never do anything but tend babies, cook rice, and care for gardens and pigs. School might be of some use to boys, but the village people waited and argued. So the school which Teacher Dodd had often talked about hadn't been started. "I think I'll go over and play with Teacher Dodd's puppy." Kandima opened the door and started down the ladder. Although still angry, she felt sorry to see no one about. Actually, she wanted to see Mukit's new knife more than anything else. The puppy had only been an excuse. Now she walked straight to the teacher's house. She found the puppy playing in the shade of a coconut tree. She threw herself down on the grass beside him, laid her cheek against his long, silky ear, and cried, "Dear puppy, I wish I could be a puppy like you. Nobody likes to see me any more. Mukit and Elijah are so mean, and I can't go to the Tuan's house." The puppy turned and licked her face with his rough, wet tongue. "Kandima!" She started at the sound of the pleasant voice and looked up to see the Tuan standing in the door of the teacher's house. "Did you help make the cakes we ate last night?" The Tuan's words made Kandima's heart warm with pleasure. "I thought you must have helped because they tasted so good." Tuan came down the ladder and sat on the grass beside the puppy. He drew Kandima close, and they sat quietly for a long time. She looked up at the side of Teacher Dodd's house. 6 baskets had been nailed to the wall. Dodd's hens slept in those bedchambers every night. Dodd called each of the 6 hens by name, and each hen came to him when he called her name. Every night they ate a fine supper of unhulled rice and table scraps. Then Dodd would call each hen to him and set her feet in a pan of water. With a clean cloth he washed and polished each one's beak, then scrubbed her feet, then gently pushed her through the little round door of her bedroom basket. All those hens lack is a good night kiss, the Tuan had laughed the first time he saw Teacher Dodd put them to bed. The puppy, too, looked clean and fat. Dodd brought canned milk for the puppy whenever he went down to the big city 40 miles away. Condima knew that he never brought milk for himself, but he always carried a few cans in his bohongans so the puppy might have a special treat once in a while. The puppy had a bath in warm, soapy water every day, too. Teacher Dodd explained that since he had no wife or child, the only way he could set a good example for the village people was by taking good care of his pets. Condima sat in the warm circle of the Tuan's arms and thought about all of these things. She looked up at the baskets. Then she looked down at the puppy. The Tuan and Todd are just good. That's what they are. Tuan pulled the puppy into his lap. I want to tell you a story, Condima. She waited, eager to hear any story that the Tuan might tell. Once a pretty little girl lived in a beautiful little village, a little girl about as big as you are right now. This little girl went about singing merry songs all day long, making everyone happy with her cheerful ways. Then one day a terrible thing happened. This little girl walked beside her older sister on her way to school. A naughty girl picked up a stone and threw it hard. Just that instant the little girl turned her head. The stone hit her right in the face. Oh, how the cruel stone hurt that poor little girl. It broke her nice straight little nose and made her sick for a long time. She never felt strong again after that. The little girl could never be proud any more. Her face didn't look pretty, and she felt sick and miserable most of the time. Condima searched the Tuan's face with such eagerness that the gray eyes misted over for just an instant. Tuan, did people ever like the little girl any more? Oh, yes. That's the wonderful part of the story. You see, the little girl felt so lonely at first that she learned to talk with Jesus. When she couldn't sleep at night, she talked to him, and he comforted her. She became so sweet and gentle in all of her ways that people loved her more than ever before, in spite of her broken and scarred nose. God let her live to be an old lady, and she did a great deal of good. What did they call the little girl? Did she have a nice name? They called her Ellen. Tuan smiled down at Condima. A warm feeling began to come back into Condima's heart. Her throat cleared, and she took a deep breath. Her little brown hands crept softly into Tuan's big, strong one, and they sat for a long time looking out across the purple valley. Dodd found them thus when he came back from the spring with the rice all washed and ready to put over the fire. Condima jumped up with a little of her old-time sparkle. She had forgotten Mookit, but at her house she found Mookit sitting on the ladder. He thrust a crudely carved doll into her hands. See, Condima, I made this baby doll for you, first thing. Aren't you glad the Tuan gave me a knife? Condima had never owned anything so precious before. She hugged the wooden baby doll to her breast in a rush of delight and thankfulness. Oh, Mookit, how did you do it? Thus forgiven and befriended, Mookit spoke in his proud voice. It is a magic knife. He took it from his pocket. I will make you a little rice huller and a buffalo cart like they have down in the big city. Then he drew out a stick of wood. After handing the knife to Condima so she could feel its sharpness, he showed her how easily he could cut the wood. See, it has 3 blades. He opened them fanwise. No one in this village has so good a knife. I will keep it as long as I live. Then my sons will keep it forever. That night Condima slept with her new dolly folded in her arms, and nothing troubled her peaceful rest. In the morning when she awakened, the Tuan was gone. She heard Teacher Dodge singing in his house. The village people had turned to their usual duties in the house and garden, field and forest. Dodge called to Condima, "Tell Koket's daughter to come over here." Koket lived only a short way from Condima's house. At news that the teacher had called her, Koket's daughter strapped her small baby to her back and followed Condima. On the floor of the teacher's house, Condima saw a big pile of clothing. Dodge began pulling small garments from the pile, little sweaters, dresses, caps, and jackets. "Are you going to give these to my baby?" Koket's daughter's eyes grew big with surprise and pleasure. She squatted down by the heap of garments. "Yes, the Tuan told me that you must have some warm clothes for your baby so he won't get sick and die like your other ones did." "The Tuan is kind and good." Koket's daughter rolled all the garments Dod had given her into a neat bundle. "You may have this little blanket, too." Dod handed over a pink check blanket bound with wide pink shiny stuff. "Your baby will be like the son of a Raja now." The young teacher laughed. "Here is a little pot of rubbing medicine for your father. Tell him to warm it over the fire before putting it on his body." All during that day, Condima heard Dod call other people to his house. Every one of them went away with some garment or food or medicine. How could the Tuan have carried all that load in his bohangans? It seemed to Condima that everybody in the village had been left with some token of the Tuan's kind thoughtfulness. But for Condima herself, the Tuan had left nothing. Oh, yes, he had left something. Condima tried to remember the thing he had left. The story. He had left the story about the poor little Ellen whose face was ruined by a stone. Condima thought the story a precious thing. And then Tuan had given Mooket the knife. She would not have her beautiful wooden baby doll if Mooket hadn't gotten the knife. Her family needed neither food nor clothing. Condima's father wasn't poor. Tuan had remembered the poor people in the Duran village. That night after Condima went to bed, she thought for a long time about the little girl whose face had been spoiled by the cruel stone. As she lay quietly under her mosquito curtain, she asked of the soft darkness, "Jesus, are you there? Will you be a friend to me like you were to little Ellen?" For the second time since the accident, Condima fell asleep without crying.